Okay, to be respectful of everybody's time, I want to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to see the turnout that we have today, and I'm so glad that you're all here. I'm Leslie Naramore, and I am the Executive Director of Washington Gorge Action Programs, which is the nonprofit community action agency for Skamania and Klickitat counties. And I think we all know that housing in our region is a huge issue. That's why we're all here today. But it's especially an issue for our low-income neighbors, for people who are at or below 80% of our area median income. So we're here today to share with you why affordable housing is so important and who this issue affects. The bottom line is that this issue affects all of us. So thank you for being here today. And we hope that this is going to be the start of a really good conversation and that we can all work towards solutions together. We also have with us here today Joel Madsen and Kenny LaPoint, who have helped to bring this roundtable idea to fruition. So I wanted to give both Kenny and Joel a moment to introduce themselves. So I'm going to hand it off to Joel if you want to go ahead and start.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Leslie mentioned, I'm Joel Madsen, the Executive Director of Mid-Columbia Housing Authority, Columbia Cascade Housing Corporation, and Columbia Gorge Housing Authority. Together, our organizations promote and administer affordable housing solutions in the Mid-Columbia region, including Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman counties, as well as Klickitat and Skamania counties. And I want to take just a minute to talk about how we work toward that goal, again, of promoting and administering affordable housing solutions. We work toward that goal with four primary lines of business. We administer rent assistance programs where we pay a portion of the rent on behalf of our program participants directly to the landlords in the private rental market. Our second line of business is we provide services to our program participants and residents at our properties. We often, in that provision of services, partner with local community partners like WAGAP and Mid-Columbia Community Action Council, as well as we provide some direct services around homebuyer education, financial literacy, access to healthcare, and a few other examples of direct services. Our third line of business that we work within to promote and administer affordable housing is that we're developers, owners, and managers of affordable housing communities. We have approximately 390 units in our portfolio across 23 different properties, spanning as far west as Cascade Locks in North Bonneville, east to Roosevelt, Washington in eastern Klickitat County. And we're actively working to increase that portfolio dedicated to lower income households and promoting that affordability target. Our fourth line of business is around home ownership. We work with current and future homeowners by delivering various home ownership program resources into our communities, and we're actively working to develop more home ownership opportunities for the lower income households throughout our region through shared equity programs and other strategies. These are our four main lines of business that bring our organizations together and help us to achieve our goal of promoting and administering affordable housing solutions throughout the region. I'm excited for today's conversation. And again, thanks for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Kenny for a brief introduction as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kenny LaPoint, and I am the Executive Director of Mid-Columbia Community Action Council. We are the Sherman, Wasco, and Hood River County Community Action Agency, much like Leslie is across the river in Washington. I've been with our agency since November of 2020, so I'm fairly new. If I haven't met some of you, I'm sure I will at some point in time here. Mid-Columbia Community Action Agency's mission is to build a better future for our community through partnership and equity-centered programs that prevent and eliminate poverty and houselessness. So I'm really excited, in particular, about the collaborative piece of this program here. I want to thank Leslie and Joel for partnering with me on this, and also for Tammy for helping us put this together as well. For those of you who don't know much about Mid-Columbia Community Action Agency, we provide energy, utility bill pay assistance, We run a weatherization program for the region. We also provide housing resources, some of them directly, some of them in partnership with Joel's organization at the Housing Authority. We also have recently become a shelter operator, and we run the Dalles pallet shelter site in the Dalles, and we've been doing that since about February of this year, and we recently became a year-round shelter at the end of March, thanks to a very strong partnership with the city of the Dalles. So with that, I'll kick it back over, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate you being here, and I'm going to go ahead and share some contact information for myself in the chat box. So if anybody would like to get a hold of me, you're welcome to do so. Thanks.
Thanks, Kenny and Joel. And thanks for the reminder that I should talk a little bit about WAGAP does, because I just realized that there are a lot of new faces here and all of you probably aren't familiar with us. So as a community action agency, like Kenny across the river, we also provide housing, emergency shelter, energy assistance, a youth center, food banks. We just provide a variety of services for low-income persons throughout Klickitat and Skamania counties. I did want to cover just a couple of housekeeping things as we're here in the meeting. I want to let you know if you have questions that come up during the presentation, you can put them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. We will not be monitoring the chat during the various presentations today, but we will have a Q&A session at the end and we will be sure to get to any questions that come up. And also Joel, Kenny, and myself will also all put our contact info in the chat so that if you have questions for us personally, you can reach out over email. And I'd now like to introduce our first panelist, Adrian Buchanan, who is joining us from the Fair Housing Center for Washington. And she's going to give an overview and definition of affordable housing. So I'd like to hand it over to Adrian now.
All right, thank you, Leslie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have 7 slides. So let me do that now. All right, so hopefully everyone can see that. I know it sounds like a big title, but I don't go that into depth into our changing world, so don't worry. My name is Adrian Buchanan. I'm Executive Director of the Fair Housing Center of Washington. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what our agency does and then get into what affordable housing is, what fair housing is, and how those two kind of play together, and kind of kick off the conversation for the day. So our agency, we're a nonprofit. We have been around since the mid-90s, and we serve 23 counties, including those in Western and Central Washington. We have a couple of different facets of our organization. The first being that we do fair housing training. We train housing providers and other people that are stakeholders in the housing industry on fair housing laws. We also do a fair amount of advocacy, and we sit on various commissions and do things like this to help folks understand what they can do to help create a better culture of compliance around fair housing laws. Okay, I was muted, so I don't know if that was on purpose or not. Okay, and then we also do testing. So we have what would be known as like a secret shopper program, where we send folks out to see what their experience is like trying to obtain housing. And based on their experiences, we take additional action. And then we also provide research and consulting to municipalities around housing trends, housing, research data, things like that. So what is affordable housing? As Leslie mentioned earlier, affordable housing, generally it's defined as housing that's between 30% and 80% of area median income. There are different definitions out there, but traditionally affordable housing definitions are drawn from HUD standards. So I want us to be on the same page as far as what we're talking about when we're talking about affordability. Area median income is, it is what it sounds like. It's the median income for the area where the housing is located. And so the number can vary based on where exactly that housing is located, but the percentages are fixed. So if we're talking about low income, it's 80% of AMI. If we're talking about very low income, usually that's around 50%. And then extremely low income is 30% of AMI. So I have a chart here that gives some guidance, but again, these exact numbers can vary based on where the housing is located. But generally, this is what a household would have to be making to qualify to receive assistance. And then these numbers help to inform what a fair market rent would be in that area. And then as far as why affordable housing is necessary, I think a lot of us know why affordable housing is necessary, but the reality is that most Americans are paying too high a percentage of their income on housing. And so that means that they're having to make a lot of really tough decisions about if they're going to pay their rent, or if they're going to pay for schooling for their child, or if they're going to pay for healthcare, if they're going to pay for transportation to get to work, or if they're going to pay for daycare. There are a lot of things in our lives that are becoming more and more expensive. And so there's less flexibility in how we spend the money that we get. And when housing becomes an even greater percentage of our income, then again, it doesn't leave much income left over for other really important things. The other important thing to note here is that housing is really unstable right now. And so housing is very unstable right now. And so what that means is, although some of us may be very comfortable in the housing situation that we're in, that doesn't mean that our housing situation can't change. And so it's really important that when we're thinking about affordability and when we're thinking about creating environments of different housing types and different levels of affordability, different levels of accessibility, and the location of that housing, that we're doing so keeping in mind that at any given point, our own housing situation can change. And so I think that's the point that I really want to drive home, is that things are changing all the time, and that our own sense of what it means to be in stable housing can also change. When we deny affordable housing in communities, it can lead to a lot of problems. So we know that it can lead to poverty, including homelessness. We know that it can lead to increases in crime, including domestic violence. In our agency, we see that a lot, where people are finding themselves in very compromising situations because they can't afford to be in housing on their own. And so they're linking up with people that are able to provide them a roof over their head or over their children's heads, and are having to compromise other parts of their livelihood for that. We're also seeing increases in squatting and other types of behavior that really just point to people being desperate, right? So there's also a greater reliance on social services when we deny affordability, and when there is a lack of available units that are affordable. So keeping in mind that we can't have communities that are free of crime and free of homelessness if we don't have affordable housing. So I know that there are a lot of communities that want to have a better environment for themselves and for their children. And how homelessness is at an all-time high right now. And so it's difficult to tackle one issue without tackling the other. So if we want to reduce homelessness, we have to increase affordable housing. So that's a lot of what I want to say for this slide. The other thing I wanted to mention is that last year, the city of White Salmon put out a report on the housing crisis and what's going on. And so I just wanted to touch on a few of the issues that stakeholders brought up in that report, and that was closures of manufactured homes, increases in homelessness and couch surfing, and then a lack of cohesive community. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but the last thing I want to say here is that in that report, it said, more than 2,000 units were going to need to be added over the next 20 to 30 years to meet the demand, right? And so that includes a need for things like mobile homes, detached homes, and then also middle housing types. So again, we want to create greater diversity in housing options and greater ranges in the types of housing that we provide, because again, at any given point, any of us can have our housing situation change. And especially as our population ages, the types of housing that are going to be necessary, we don't have enough of right now. Okay, and then what is fair housing? So again, our agency is really a fair housing agency, and what we do is we try to make sure that any housing that's available, including affordable housing, isn't that people aren't being denied that housing based on one or more aspects of their identity, right? So at the federal level, there are 7 protected classes, and those are race, color, national origin, sex, familial status, disability, and religion. And so at any given time, a person can experience discrimination that can lead to a denial of housing or the opportunity to enjoy that housing. And we've seen that a lot, especially as it relates to disability. So as I mentioned, the population is aging, and nationwide, over half of all complaints about discrimination in housing have to do with disability and people not being able to enjoy their housing because they're not getting the accommodations that they need, right? So that could be they're not getting a ramp put in or some type of accessible, other accessible modification that would help them enjoy the property. Or maybe they have a need for an emotional support animal, or for, in a lot of cases, it might be even like a service dog that the housing provider isn't allowing the family to have. And so there have been a lot of really unfortunate cases around that where people are being denied. So we want to make sure that, again, whatever housing is made available is accessible to everyone. And so how do these things work together, right? They can work together in a lot of ways, but the thing that I want to call to everyone's attention is something called affirmatively furthering fair housing. And municipalities that receive community development block grant funds, they are required to certify that they are affirmatively furthering fair housing. And if you've been following the rulemaking on AFFH, then you know that the interim final rule will go into effect at the end of the month. And so basically what that means is the Biden administration is reverting back to the Obama administration's interpretation of AFFH. And so it includes things like making strides to overcome past segregation and foster inclusive communities. Again, ensuring housing is marketed to those least likely to apply and that it's also accessible, reviewing policies and procedures to ensure that there's no disparate impact. And so that can come into play when we're talking about density and when we're talking about zoning and things like that. In some instances, a municipality might have an ordinance that says, they might have a 1 person per bedroom policy, right? And so something like that could be seen as having a disparate impact on families. So making sure that policies and procedures aren't creating additional barriers. and then committing to greater fair housing education among housing providers, because I think that a lot of housing providers are aware of the Fair Housing Act and what their responsibilities are, but there are a lot of nuances, and there's been a lot of new HUD guidance around how to interpret the Fair Housing Act. And so we want to make sure that people know what their responsibilities are, and also what who is liable and who is considered an agent in the housing process. So you know, volunteers and maintenance staff and other folks that are interacting with tenants are also responsible for upholding the Fair Housing Act. So really just making sure that people are aware of that. But basically, you know, from our agency's perspective, that's how we see these things playing together. We want to see municipalities work to not just create affordable housing, because I mean, that in and of itself is a huge challenge, and you know, what we're talking about today, but ensuring that whatever housing is created is also really accessible. And so for the last slide, as far as, you know, where do we go from here? Education and outreach is really important. People need to understand the nuances of the law, reviewing zoning policies and also budget priorities. When we look at municipalities that have been sued in the past, it has been on the basis of some of the zoning policies and some of the budget priorities not being in line with their commitment to foster inclusive communities. So making sure that people are aware of that, and if they are having challenges with how to kind of operationalize a strategy around that, we can be helpful in that way. Also, you know, creative approaches to increasing affordable housing stock. I mean, I know there are a lot of people on this call today that are working in that realm. And so just, you know, continuing to be creative and continuing to engage with stakeholders to really understand what the challenges are and how to create solutions that are actually going to work for the people that they're intended to work for. And so we're really big proponents of stakeholder engagement and having that feedback loop throughout all of these different processes. So, you know, we're here to help, and you know, thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Adria. We're now going to move into a stories portion of our presentation, because it's one thing to hear about affordable housing and hear about the effects of it, but it's a completely different thing to actually have that personalized and to hear stories of people who have been affected by that. So I'd like to introduce Ubaldo Hernandez, who is joining us today. He's with Comunidades and Columbia Riverkeeper, and he also serves on the WAGAP Board of Directors. So I would like to hand it over to Ubaldo now.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone, for being here and wanting to hear and learn more about the housing crisis in the Gorge, situation that affects our Latino community the most. And so since we are a community that have been working and producing well for this community, we felt like we've been treated unfair in case of housing. One of the many things that we found, and I would like to talk to you about it. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about Comunidades, the group I'm representing today. So Comunidades is a Latino-led group created 2 years ago to represent our Latino community in the Gorge area. So our community, historically, we haven't had any representation that advocate for social justice, environmental and social justice. So we have groups that they advocate for health and they do some social justice work, but not really fulfilling the needs of our community or compromising enough to really advocate for the needs of our community. And we, through these years that I've been working in this community, being a social activist for over 25 years in this community, I haven't seen really groups that really advocate and compromise with our Latino community to overcome these issues. So comunidades, that's the work that we're gonna do. We are gonna work to advocate for social justice and environmental justice at the same time, because we believe that we cannot heal one body just healing one wound. We need to work in social justice and environmental justice at the same time, because when environmental injustice happen, it turns into a social injustice on our poor communities, on our segregated communities, on our immigrant communities. We always pay the high price directly on our communities. One of the examples that we were analyzing last year was pesticides. How pesticides, we talk about in the environmental advocacy world, they affect the soils, waters, ground, forests. But when it turns to our community, Latino community, it affects our community directly. We have a lot of people that get affected by the use of pesticides. We have people that they get chronic diseases, cancer, and that problems, they destroy the poor economy that we have. So this is one of the things why we want to work and close to our community and really be the voice of our communities in issues as social justice, and in this case, affordable housing. So for the last year and a half, we were having meetings with different groups of the Latino communities in the Gorge. We have meetings with people from the Dells, people in Hood River, people from Escamilla, people from Cliquita County, and we collect a lot of information on how people feel about different issues about social justice. One of those things that we talk about was affordable housing. And since we were really highly involved in an issue that happened last year when 25 families were displaced from a trailer park that was closed, and all these families lose their houses. Many of them ended up being homeless. And for sure, a lot of young Latinos, teenagers, they ended up being homeless because they didn't want to leave the place where they grow up and where they go to school. And they felt that was unfair for them to have to leave this community because they couldn't afford to find a house that they can pay rent. So talking to many people from our community, there is a different conversations that we have and different information that we gather and hear from our community. One of the things is affordable housing is not affordable in this area anymore. And this is based on the salaries our community has, the Latino community. We are talking about farm workers, packing house workers that have been living in this community for decades. And all these communities, when they work and live here, they produce wealth for this community. They pay taxes regardless of their status. So everybody in this country pay taxes. There is a misconception of when people talk about that undocumented Latinos or undocumented immigrants don't pay taxes. Everybody in this country pay taxes no matter what. Even you go shopping, when you work, and even the state, if you don't have a social security number, they allow you to get an ITN number so you can pay your taxes. So is that, I just want to make sure that everybody understand that. Everybody pay taxes in this community, in this country. So when we hear about this rhetoric about, undocumented immigrants, they don't pay taxes, they don't deserve services. We do pay taxes, everybody pay taxes in this country. And we do deserve services for what we contribute to our communities. So we are talking about affordable housing when also a lot of these packing house workers and farm workers that they've been working here for decades, their salaries are ranged between, I said healthy, which for our community will be kind of healthy salary from 25,000 to 32,000. And I'm talking about somebody who's really lucky, because we have to understand that a lot of the community that work in the packing house or farms, those works are seasonal. There is days or weeks where they can't work because there is not enough work for them. The same is in the serving industry, restaurants, hotels. When you don't have enough customers, you don't have enough hours to work. So those salaries, especially in the winter, they go down really bad. So that's when people faces a lot of struggles. Um, and when I talk to people, and they tell me about when they're going to apply to get a house, the first thing they encounter, they have to do um, a criminal background check for each member of the family that's going to live in the property on the or the house, which is about $50 for what they told me for each member. And it doesn't matter what the age; they need to have a criminal background check. That money is not. If they don't get the house, they don't get the money back. Then we have people that from the crisis last year, from the people that were displaced on the trailer park, when they were looking for a house, they even were told that they cannot rent them because they have kids. And this is people that was desperate looking for a place to live and being know that they're going to be evicted from the house that they were live for over 20 years, where their kids grow up. And then some of them, they still have kids and they can't rent because they have kids. There, we have another person from the same situation where this guy told me that they can approve his rent to rent him an apartment, but when they found out that he was gay, they called him and tell him that they were not going to rent him anymore. Why? Because they were not okay with him showing up dressed as a woman. That was the reason that they gave him. So this is one of the things that our community is facing when they are trying to rent a house, an apartment. The other thing, the prices of housing is really expensive. If you want to relocate or move, you have to have the last price and deposit, which it come up about $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, which we are talking about packing house workers, farm workers, that they don't have the money. And they ended up splitting their families or living 3, 4 families in a house that nobody knows because they are not letting the renters know that there's so many people living there. I was talking to a group from Escamania, and I had 2 old ladies that they were living with their kids. And they were telling me that they don't want to live with their kids. They want to live on their own because they're still working. They work 8, 9 hours at the packing house. But they can afford to rent their own place. And one other thing is they're homeless because they're living with their parents, with their family, without wanting to do that. It's just because it's the only thing they can do because they can't afford to rent a house. I've been talking to some people and doing some research about what is needed for a person to rent a house, and how these real estate agencies or landowners, they are trying to work with. When they say they try to work with a community to provide affordable housing. One of the things that I found out is that what they said is they're following rules that people that is going to be renting for them, they need to make 3 times the amount of what they're paying in rent. But this is one of the things that we discovered is that our Latino community don't make those 3 times the cost of rent. So they ended up not getting access to these houses. And this is a big problem that we have because we need to have regulations that really look into what's the real salary or the real income that our communities has in this community to really provide affordable housing. We have another landlord here in White Salmon that bought the complex 2 years ago, and instantly, as soon as he got become owner of this complex, he raised the rent from $600 to $900, $300 right away, where low-income families were living there. And not less than a year, he raised the rent again. And now these families are struggling to pay rent, to survive. We're talking about $600 in less than 2 years, rent increase on these families. And then this person is building in front something that he called affordable housing, which he's going to split it with seasonal renting. But he's saying, I'm going to rent 4 months as a seasonal and 8 months as a long-term rentals. And that's what he's calling long-term rentals, 8 months. And he was allowed to build that building. So, and this is some of the predatory practices that we see on our community, economic predatory practices that they are applied to the people that have the less, people who makes $25,000 to $32,000 a year. And there is nobody that is really paying attention on that. Who protects those interests? Because we always talk about, oh, they're investing in our community. They're bringing millions of dollars in our community. But how much that reflect on the economy that a single worker that works in the packing house for 25 years living in this community, what they bring to this community? They bring a lot too. They bring a lot of resources, because a lot of the money that's allocated to these towns is because of the amount of people that live here. So we are, as a community, bringing a lot to this community too, and we need to be protected from these predatory practices. It's really disturbing to hear the stories of our community, Latino community in this area, and knowing the salaries that they are making and how much they have to pay in rent. And we are talking about affordable housing only here. Because we can talk about healthcare and so many other issues, education, and all those expenses that they need to cover, but they don't make enough. And nevertheless, we have these real estate agencies renting in the area where they say, oh, we want to be affordable, but people need to make that 3 times what they make to pay the rent. But they're basing their salaries, because I talked to this guy, I think his name is Theodore, the guy who's building in White Salmon. And he was talking about the salaries that professionals make, about $40,000. It's crazy what he was talking about, because they're disconnected. They don't know how much a farm worker makes, a person that works in the packing house, a person that works on the retail industry, on restaurants. And this is not an issue just for the Latino community. This issue is for all low-income communities. We are seeing, I've been living in this community for 27 years. And I don't see any of those local families that they were living here anymore. They are being pushed away too. And I don't think that's fair. And I think our local representatives or people that work in advocating for housing rights, low income housing, they need to pay attention on that and really do more work. The other thing I think I mentioned earlier about the elders, that they are many of them, they're homeless. They live with their families, but we have to think about they live in a small 2-bedroom apartment with kids and grandparents that they can't afford to live alone anymore. So the other thing that we were talking about in our community also is about the ecological impact that it costs to displace people from living close to their place of work. In this case, we're talking about Bingen. So all these people that used to live here in town from the trailer park, now they're living in Houston, the Dells, Dalsport. So for them to move to work now, they have to drive about 30 minutes one way, an hour a day. More gas, more resources, less time with their families. So, and that's what these house prices, renting prices are pushing people to less time with their families, contaminating more. And the other thing that we heard too is that a lot of people that rent in this affordable housing complex, they've been discriminated. People abuse them because they live in these places. We have I had a conversation with few families that they live in Rhine Village in White Salmon, and how this manager is so abusive, and they put so many rules that kids not even cannot go out and play if there is not adult with them, and many things that they do to them because of their situation, because they know their situation. So the housing problem in this community is really disturbing, and disturbing in the way that how it affects our low-income community, people that can't afford to pay the high rent prices to live in town anymore, to live in a place where their family grow up to. So, and they're being displaced. I think one of the things I'm gonna have left to say is just to, I'm not gonna ask, I'm gonna demand our local officials to really pay attention on this issue and find solutions. Because at this moment, there is kids that are living, they're homeless, elders that are homeless, and they have a struggle to find a house, a place, a safe place to live. And when people are homeless, they're vulnerable because they're living with someone or with somebody that might will take advantage of them because of their situation. So this is a time where all these people that are advocating for our community, they want to solve the solution. They need to get together and really find a solution. Our community is suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, Ubaldo. And, you know, I was just reflecting on one of the things that you said, that a body can't heal one wound at a time, that you have to heal the whole body. And I think that's why we're here today, because one part of our community needs healing. One part of our community is suffering. And so that's why we're here, is to try to help and address that issue. We're going to move on to Deborah Whitefoot next. She's with Nichiwana Housing, and she's going to share some of her experiences with us around affordable housing. And then once Deborah wraps up, we're going to have a conversation with Mayor Marla Keithler and Councilwoman Megan Saunders from the city of Hood River. And then we're going to have a Q&A. And just as a reminder, if you have questions that come up, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. And then Ubaldo, I would ask if you can please drop your contact information in the chat. So if anybody would like to get a hold of you, they have that option. So I'm going to hand it over to Deborah now.
Christian Timke, Deborah Whitefoot. Good afternoon. My given name is Alishwala, which comes from this area of the Columbia River. And my English name is Deborah Whitefoot. I am a member of the Yakama Nation. I come from the Wishkam and Tidnapum bands. If you're not familiar with that, Wishkam is from Wishram. Tidnapum is from Cowlitz, the Cowlitz area. First of all, I want to acknowledge the land that we live on, because it's very important to our Native people, as we were placed here by the Creator since time immemorial. If any of you can grasp that idea, we were here long ago, and I want to acknowledge my ancestors who survived, who persevered, who endeavored, and were resilient. And that is why I am still here today, and why my grandchildren are here today also. They are one of the reasons why I am working in this business of affordable housing. I want to go back and give you some historical information for your information. There is a housing crisis today. And part of that, why that affects everyone, but mainly I want to talk about my people right now, is construction of the dams in 1930s and the tribal communities that were displaced because of the dams. And the federal obligation that remains today that they have not fulfilled their promise. It's very sad because many promises have been broken. But since we're right here on the Columbia River, this area is filled with historical information, archaeological treasures that have been done, but most of all is the people. And so Inchiwana Housing was formed because of a study and because of the federal obligation by the federal government to replace housing that was inundated by the dams, mainly the one at Celilo. And I worked for Yakama Nation Housing Authority and my tribe for many years in affordable housing and for the tribe. And I had proposed, there was a director that came and he was very progressive because he came and asked me what I thought our vision was of a 5-year plan for the Columbia, for housing. And I said, we need housing along the Columbia River. Many of our people that live along the river are very far from tribal programs. And the tribal programs, because of logistical constraints and financial constraints, are not able to provide services to their tribal members that live here, even though they are enrolled in the tribe. The people that live here because of their tie to the river, and our tie to the river is the salmon. And I'm telling you this because in our culture, our creation story tells us that the Creator made this land for us. That everything that's here, such as the foods, were for the Native people, the indigenous people of this land. And I think a lot of people forget that or don't even know about that. But I want to make that point to you good people here as you think about things that are said today. And so there was a housing development that we proposed developing at Dalesport. It didn't go through for many reasons, one of them being a wetland was found. Also, we received a lot of NIMBY from the community who did not want affordable housing in their community, especially Native housing. We also found a significant archaeological find called the Eel Trail. The Eel Trail was an ancient trail that people used to get to the river. Later on, it was used by the US Cavalry because it goes over the Simcoe Mountains all the way to White Swan. And through those mountains, they found that a day's ride would stop at a great camping place by water. So the ancient trail had to be preserved. And it's still there at Dallas-Port in the empty lot owned by Yakima Nation Housing Authority. My heart was broken when that entity, that development did not happen, because it was very hopeful. The people were very hopeful they were going to get homes. And it didn't happen. In the meantime, the creation of a new Columbia River intertribal housing entity, the study was happening. I was invited to the technical assistance meetings. There were 2 sets of meetings, one for policymakers and one for technical assistance. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers facilitated this process. So, with that being said, today where we stand with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers village replacement plans may not still happen. Even after over 70 years, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is unable to fulfill their federal obligation, which leaves us at the point where we have people who are tied to this land, tied to this river because of the salmon. And they will continue to do that because it is our inherent right, 2, because it is our way of life to provide the salmon for the people and to take care of them and to speak for those things that cannot speak for themselves. So I just wanted to give you some of that historical information regarding a little bit of the background. We are becoming a 501c3. 501c3, we're very close to that status. We have a board, an official board, who gives direction to Inchiwana housing. One of the directions is development of affordable housing for tribal members that live along this river. Currently, Yakima Nation Housing Authority, my former employer, did continue with housing development along the Columbia River. And they are currently building 46 units at Wishram, which they have tasked me with a subrecipient agreement to provide and develop their waiting list. So we have done that. We're working on that. We're almost to 100, and they have, I believe, 4 houses that will be rented up in October. The 46 houses will be built in phases of 4 to 5 houses per phase. Final rent up will be December 2022. This is a low income housing tax credit development, which we talked about earlier and heard about. That is the only development, affordable housing development, tribal housing development that's going on currently in the Columbia River. It's very challenging, and it's in very challenging times we're doing this. The price of lumber is very high, but they are still moving forward. And so I wanted to talk about stories as I was tasked to do and asked to do for this panel. And there are many, many stories, but what I want to talk about is Inchiwana, and I wanted to show you something. I'm not sure if you have seen this before, and I can share my screen. Let's see, I will do that. And here we go. I want to show you a picture of something you may or may not be familiar with. This is the Inlu site. There are 27 Inlu sites up and down the Columbia River on both Washington and Oregon. This is my service area. And it encompasses about 175 miles approximately. So as you see, this is the poverty that exists in the shadow of the Dalles Dam. These folks don't have electricity, which I think is ironic because they sit in the shadow of the Dalles Dam. And they have very little resource, I think one source for water, which is ironic also. So a lot of people may ask, why do Indians live like this? Why? Why do they live like this? Well, I only have 15 minutes, but a lot of it has to do with historical trauma from the loss of income. During the Celilo Falls era, Native Americans that lived here, the indigenous people, were wealthy people. They had need for nothing. They worked in the salmon industry, and I couldn't find the picture from long ago, but there was a village at Underwood, and the village was clean. It was nice. They had a nice car. There was fish drying racks out in the front, and life was good because they were economically self-sufficient. It's a different story today. And that is from historical trauma that has trickled down to intergenerational trauma. And it's a lot to talk about in the 15 minutes, but that is what has happened to my people, and that's how they are affected today. I'm a part of a collaboration of about 30 providers. Some of them are in this meeting, a Gorge Native American collaboration, who is taking the approach in a holistic manner. There is healthcare providers, educators, state government, county programs. There are food banks. There are a bevy of providers who are taking this approach holistically to solving the problem, because the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers hasn't done it in 70 years, and they may not do it in the next 20 years. We don't know. They find a way to stall the process. So hopefully this entity will look at developing housing also, sustainable, affordable housing, but it will require a lot of community providers to help in the self-sufficiency process. Teaching people how to not live in campers, but to live in homes, helping them to find more jobs, helping them to get education and training. And the focus I have is the youth. I want to have a youth focus because a lot of the children who have not been able to live in affordable housing or any housing want to live differently. I don't want to leave you with a comment on why I do this work. We were doing a salmon clause one year to the kids. And so we asked the kids, what would you like for Christmas? One of the kids said, I want a house with electricity, with water, and my own bathroom. These are the basic needs that we take for granted that these people don't have. And that's why I work in this job. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you for sharing with us today. And thank you for doing that land acknowledgement as well. I really appreciate that. Deborah, if you can also please leave your contact information in the chat. So if people would like to get a hold of you, they know how to do that. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joel, who is going to guide us through a conversation with our last two guests, Megan Saunders and Marla Kiefler. So thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And again, thank you, Ubaldo and Deborah, for lifting up the stories of some of our community members, our neighbors that are most impacted by this housing affordability crisis that's before us and challenge that's before us. And I know I've mentioned it to you two both before, but I want to say in this group setting, we're here to help and we want to be part of that solution. And thanks for, again, lifting up the stories and grounding us in some of our most impacted community members. I wanted to take the opportunity, we wanted to take the opportunity this afternoon to also highlight some of the work that a couple localities throughout the gorge are taking as it relates to affordable housing solutions. And this afternoon, we're going to hear from Mayor Marla Keithler from the City of White Salmon, as well as Megan Saunders from the Hood River City Council. I'm going to kick it off with a question that we'll start with you, Megan, and then we'll ask Mayor Keithler to follow up on. Tell us why affordable housing is a priority, and how does this priority show up for you in the work that you're doing to advance affordable housing?
Thanks, Joel. Well, I mean, first and foremost, as you all just heard in the last hour, you know, one of the biggest reasons why this is a priority is both a massive need and a huge cost on individuals and families and households. You know, financial cost, emotional cost, physical cost, environmental cost. You know, from the policymaker standpoint, the lack of affordable housing and the displacement of current residents is also a huge cost for the community structure, community health. You know, folks that have roots here, have links here, spend time here, build homes and lives and families here are being lost. And that is a huge loss for the community as we think of it, as we know it, as we love it. One of the big differences between just, you know, physical space where people live and basically is a resort town versus an actual town and community that people know and love and want to be in is the people and the roots and everything. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Mike. I'll try to get closer. Is this better? Okay, I have a bad computer. But yeah, so maintaining a community of actual people is a huge priority. And that very much means you're not displacing your lowest income residents. We are, of course, at this point doing that basically. Big picture, again, there's the cost to the individuals, but also the cost to the local economy of losing these folks. Our lowest income residents have been and are being displaced, as we heard earlier. You know, folks basically can't even afford to work in the city of Hood River anymore, or we're getting close to that breaking point. We've heard plenty of anecdotal stories from various businesses and industry folks about the fact that they have had long-term really good employees that are leaving because it just doesn't work anymore. And so that there's a cost there. I don't know when or how we'll hit that breaking point, but certainly businesses and industries that have the business model that would allow them to leave at some point if we continue on the current trajectory will go somewhere else where they can attract and you know, retain the employees they need to be successful. For businesses that obviously can't move, you know, an orchard is not going to be moving somewhere else. A hotel is not going to be moving somewhere else. A restaurant will not move somewhere else. They're going to continue to face the hardships of shortages and lack of employees that they need, which has an impact on the entire community. So it's in my mind, there's the three prongs of the individual, you know, equity and well-being that we do need to care about, but also the larger community health and economic health. So within that, and we've heard individual stories today. I mean, I'll just highlight a few of kind of the still depressing data of why the city of Hood River has made this a priority for a number of years. And unfortunately, it has been continuing to get worse. But, you know, so even back in 2015, our housing needs analysis showed a deficit of over 200 units of housing that would be affordable to low-income folks, you know, 80% of area median income and below. That has only continued to get worse as, you know, median incomes have increased over the last 10 years by about 27%, but home prices have increased by 41% and rental prices actually by a median price by 64%. And I do want to really highlight the rental prices there because, of course, many folks, definitely 60% of area median income and below, and most folks under 80% are going to be renters. And in fact, in the city of Hood River, home ownership rates have been dropping. And so actually the majority of residents in the city of Hood River, 54% are renters. So the increasing costs there, the increasing challenges, and Ubaldo and folks have really touched on this as well, continues to burden people even when they think they've found stable housing. Prices go up in a way that often, depending on your interest rate, but mortgages may not, but rentals are way more insecure and problematic. And so within all of that, you know, we've got, I think our most recent data is from 2019, but 48%, almost half of all renters are cost burdened. And so are paying more than they can really afford for their housing. About a quarter of homeowners are also house burdened, so that's also not great. And in all this, so it's been getting worse as we've been monitoring this data and trying to work on it over, a lot of this data is from the last decade. But it's actually, and then we can bring the trajectory out going forward. And if we don't change what we're doing, if we cannot fix this problem, it of course gets worse. So things like right now, if you were making 80% of area median income, about 2% of the city's housing stock, not 2% of what's on the market, but 2% of the total housing stock not available, just in existence, would be affordable to you at 80% of median income. And about 15% of the housing stock about a decade ago would have been affordable. So still not great. But if we continued the current trends that we've been seeing, less than 1% will be affordable to someone making 80% of area median income in about, I guess, honestly, 7 years at this point, which is a pretty stark and dramatic problem. Which I'm going to speak for me personally, not for the full council here, but really tells you that this is a huge problem. This is the problem, and requires a really aggressive stance and a really aggressive suite of projects to address. So kind of moving to Joel's second half of that question, and sorry, I'm taking a long time. I'm passionate.
Thank you very much. I do want to give Mayor Keither a moment to also respond to this question, and we'll come back to you in a second.
Okay,
again, this question around why is affordable housing a priority for you, Mayor Keither, and how does this priority show up in your work?
Well, one, just to echo everyone else so far, thank you, Leslie, for organizing this conversation today. It's beyond impressive to see how many people are tuning in and hearing some of the stories that have already been shared. I think puts the faces that we need on an issue that often becomes very generalized. But, we say affordable housing, but I think when you start talking about homes, you can visualize much more the families and the people that are affected by this. And this is and are our neighbors. I would say that affordable housing matters because this is the most frequent topic I hear about from people in our community, whether, and you heard from Ubaldo earlier, but whether it was many of those residents who were displaced from a closure that happened in our community a year ago, to people who are in between tenancy and are renters and the struggles that they are encountering, are business owners who frequently bring this up as a topic of not being able to retain their workforce or recruit people. We experience it as an employer at City Hall. So I think that housing has become probably our most central issue that we're focusing on. And, Megan obviously shared some figures that they're seeing in Hood River. And when it comes to the Gorge, really in many ways, this issue being one of them, we are one community, but in White Salmon, it's really heightened because we are the fastest growing city in our county. We know that. We're projected to capture 45% of the overall net new housing within Klickitat County. And we see where we're at right now when we look at how land has been used and how it's being allocated. And so in order to move the needle on this topic, there's a lot of things that have to fall into place, and the government's role, both at the local level and higher, is one piece of this puzzle. But we realize and are prioritizing that without us enacting some change in the areas that we can when it comes to policy and how we are regulating or overseeing the development in our community, no matter what other groups bring to the table, we still won't see, I think, noticeable change going forward. And so we're very motivated right now and engaged in ways on the policy front, which I think we're going to talk about soon. So
that's a perfect segue. Please tell us more about what you're doing at the city around affordable housing, Mayor Keither.
Well, so again, for White Salmon, we are in the process of updating our comprehensive plan. And this is pretty much the framework that every city in Washington operates on in terms of guiding that long-term vision for your land use and making sure that you're planning appropriately for the projected needs that you have. So obviously housing is a pretty central conversation point. But within that, I think that as we've been dealing with that process, and I think you're seeing this nationally right now, there is a reckoning that's happening. And I think back to taking ownership in that lane of how government policies have exacerbated this housing situation. You know, historically, and the origin of land use regulations, they have been used to segregate people by race and class. Federal, local land use decisions, restrictive covenants. You've heard a lot about redlining in this last year in this conversation, and where public housing has traditionally been placed, all of that has been rooted in a place of facilitating racial and economic segregation within communities. And I think what's most distressing right now in the Gorge, and as we're applying it back into that comprehensive plan, is realizing that the economic segregation is very active and underway. When we see the dynamic right now, and this is nationally, but you know, prices are up 24%. And anecdotally, if you check Zillow for any of our communities in the Gorge, it's shocking what some homes are being listed at, and often selling at above that price. And this is not an equal opportunity boom. And I think that's what's been distressing, is that you see buyers coming in and taking houses off the market that could be long-term homes for people that would be able to then realize home ownership and that opportunity to build wealth and pass it on to the next generation. And so for us, being able to see the history of these tools and now shift the course and realize that these tools can be used to accurately reflect a community's desires and plans, but we have to be intentional and make sure that things that we are doing don't have unintended consequences. And so how we're trying to align that right now when it comes to affordable housing is really looking at the practices that we've had in the past that maybe were prohibitive and that created more regulation that then exacerbated this increase in the prices that we're currently seeing, and how can we start to shift that?
Thank you very much, Mary Luther. And just want to lift up one specific thing that I know we've seen and noticed, and I wanted to call it out. You know, the city of White Salmon has recently navigated the discussion that Ubaldo lifted up around the displacement and closure of mobile home park. And I just want to applaud your leadership, Mayor Keithler, in navigating the process to be able to identify a different zoning code that can help in part preserve mobile home parks for our community, and also try to incentivize additional affordable housing development. So again, just wanted to make that pitch and say thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you. And just to interject quickly, if I can, but since you brought that up, and I'm glad that you brought that up to bring me back to a very relevant topic to this. But you know, I think that is a good example, again, where in order to come to the table and try to engage with all the entities necessary on this topic, there has to be an ownership too of past failures or missteps. And there have been missteps, and we're seeing that and reckoning with it. This mobile home displacement that our community experienced a year ago is a perfect example of that. That is a failure in my mind from not enacting the change that the community dictated, said that they wanted in that last comprehensive plan over a decade ago, and it made us vulnerable. And where we are now is we have lost and are down to our last remaining mobile home community within city limits, and where we had been with 3. And so shifting that course, I think, also requires communities of our size to have the right focus locally. Often we outsource a lot of these plannings and long-term strategies to consultants. And so a big effort that we're undertaking within our city is hiring a land use planner. And I do believe strongly that that will be a critical component to us taking these big picture policies and goals and translating them into the actual code that can protect and activate the change that we want to see happening. And that did not happen from that last plan.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I do want to give Councillor Saunders a couple minutes here. I know we're bumping up on time, and I also want to ask one last question, but on this point, if you could provide just some brief examples, Councilor Saunders, on what specifically is the city doing and maybe looking forward to address the affordable housing challenge. Again, just really focusing on what we're considering here, the definition of affordable housing at 80% and below the area median incomes.
Yes, and so with the time constraint, and my previous comment of basically the scale of the problem is so large that there is no one solution, or honestly even no 5 solutions that will solve this. So we are working at many income levels in many different ways, with many different prongs of the hopeful solution at once and over time to try and get there. I am going to dial in on the ones that are really aimed at the 80% and below, to Joel's point. And I'm going to just reiterate what Marla had said before. In general, cities are not the actual housing producer or developer. We are kind of creating the groundwork, creating the incentives, getting rid of disincentives that allow for other folks to really produce the housing types and housing costs that we want to see. But in that really exciting looking forward, a bit more active than the city maybe tends to be, or we have been thus far. The city last year purchased 7 acres of property on Rand Road, specifically for development of affordable housing. The city council, when we were discussing goals for this project, the #1 goal of council was the development of housing units for households in the 80% of area median income and below. Current financial analysis of that property shows that we will hopefully get about 100 units or more for that income level. The property will also have a few other uses kind of peripheral to that that I think will be good for the larger community and those hopefully future residents. And I'm going to just make the plug here, since we've got everyone, of how you can engage. That project definitely still has some funding gaps to make that whole project pencil out and work. And so advocating locally and statewide for funding that will help make that project a reality, definitely important. Quick touch on a few other just very specific ones. The city, and this ties into Rand Road, the city passed a construction excise tax a couple of years ago that is a 1% tax on all new development. And that money is set aside specifically to help with projects or incentives for, again, housing that is just 80% of area median income and below. And so that creates this funding source that's sustainable that we are currently using to leverage to actually have purchased that Rand Road property. We're using that money as debt service for that 7 acres. But hopefully in the future, as that money continues to grow, it will provide more options, so we can do developer incentives for individual projects. We can help support infrastructure costs or system development charges and various other things to create an environment that builds on that. And there's a bunch more I'd want to touch on, but Joel, I'm going to pass it to you. So
thank you so much. Appreciate those highlights. And I know we're supposed to be in Q&A, but there's a lot of folks here on this call. And so if you were able to summarize quickly, how you feel folks here can best engage. I know Councilor Saunders just mentioned about advocating broadly. Mayor Kiesler, what's your parting words, so to speak, of how people can really engage and be effective in part of the solution for affordable housing?
Well, I would say to community members, the general public, Megan is absolutely correct. Showing up, being an ally, advocating on these issues. What we see time and time again is when the public hearings occur around any land use decision or other issues that intersect here, tenant protection, there's the conversation or the input is often lopsided, and it tends to be those that are already invested on these types of issues. So developers, people who are incentivized to make sure that the regulations align with what their desires are, instead of hearing from the larger community. And so I think showing up on these issues, advocating, pushing for the type of housing development that we need to see, which within a city limit is going to be increased density at the end of the day, especially with the constraints we're under in the scenic area. I would also challenge people who are professionals in the construction and real estate space. We hear often that the numbers just don't pencil out, that no matter what the incentives are that come in from a state or city to try to encourage affordable housing development, that it's not beneficial. the same way that cities and governments are rethinking their approach and how we use tools like policies to better help this topic, I would hope they're challenging themselves to innovate as well. If it is too cost prohibitive to make the numbers net out on development, rethink your approach. There's innovation happening across the country on this issue. Real estate. Every time a listing is posted in our community that advertises it as an investment or second home opportunity, those are words not aimed at maintaining the community that has been built that is now desirable to other people. And so I think across the board, if this is an issue that matters, if you want to protect the communities that you know, the people that live there and call it home, this touches all areas in terms of general public and all the different industries and professionals that touch this area.
Thank you so much, Mayor Keithler. And I also, just to really get down to details, I know the city of White Salmon, and you've mentioned a couple times working through the comp plan. So check out the website. There are public hearings imminently before us to engage as community members. I want to also just acknowledge that we wanted to leave time for Q&A here. And before we jump there, I've seen in the chat some comments. I just want to acknowledge that we really want to prioritize our Q&A to the topic that brings us here today, and that's affordable housing as we're looking at it for 80% area median income households particularly. So we'll cruise the Q&A and try to prioritize the Q&A that again are directed specifically at the topic that brings us here today. As you're thinking about those Q&As, I want to also acknowledge Mayor McBride. Thank you. I appreciate the active chats in there, and also some of the other comments about what the city of Hood River is doing to include their recent request for qualifications for an affordable housing developer that came out today. So Kenny, Leslie, I believe we're all going to help lift up the Q&A. So I know there was
a lot here. Sorry, I'm trying to read these and kind of weed out so we can get down to, like you said, affordable housing.
One of the questions that I saw, thank you, Patty, for directing this question, is how does affordable housing and transportation relate? And so I guess I want to give Councilor Saunders a chance to address that. If she would like to prefer to punt, that's okay. But I feel like there's been some intentional effort within the city of Hood River, particularly in this project on Rand Road, about aligning transportation in the affordable housing goals.
Yeah, I think those overlap. I'm going to say maybe in two big ways. Of one, public transit is definitely for everyone, but certainly folks in our lower income areas or incomes, I guess, tend to be more unstable when it comes to transportation than the larger community. And so having good, strong public transit specifically to areas they're using, and also just around to various economic spaces, jobs, and various opportunities is critical to the health and well-being of those individuals and those families. On the other side of that, and I think this is sometimes we get really focused on housing, and certainly that's the topic tonight, but also thinking about the cost of living in town is not just the housing itself, but also utility rates, transportation, cost of food, all those things added together. And so certainly the city has really been trying to, again, in that toolbox of we need various things to solve the large problem, thinking through. We just updated our, reduced utility rate assistance program to hopefully expand that to a lot of other folks to help, again, reduce some costs, hopefully keep them in more stable housing. And I think public transit is a good way to also think through that. And we actually just approved that program too. We'll be providing with 240 passes to low-income residents to be able to use the CAT system for free for a year. But again, provides them with better access to everything in the community, and hopefully at a cheaper price, or in that case free, to again create some flexibility in their budget and help with the reality that just costs in all places, and certainly in housing, are high. And I'm going to punt to Joel if there's something more he wanted to touch on.
Thank you so much for that. Mayor Keithler, if there's anything you want to add, and while you're thinking about that, again, please drop your Q&As in the chat. Again, we're really trying to focus on that affordable housing Q&A. Mayor Keithler.
Well, I think on that transportation topic, it's directly connected, and I think a refrain that we've heard in other conversations on this topic often is, oh, well, you can't do any sort of affordable housing in White Salmon. People need to move to Dallasport or further east. So that is punting the problem instead of taking ownership. And how that aligns with transportation, I think Ubaldo spoke to this, but now you are adding additional costs onto a household and to those families and those workers who live here. And that is not then hitting the mark of truly affordable housing. And so using our city centers and aligning housing that is either walking distance or close to the available public transit opportunities is also a critical component. That helps to keep that equation truly affordable for that household and that family.
Thank you so much, and thanks to those who are now pouring in questions in the Q&A. So, Kurt Gray, if you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question, have you directed someone, or I can help direct that Q&A.
I just posed the question, having lived in a number of destination areas, that the problem with affordable housing, as I see it, is that if the housing has been a business in this country, in this area, for decades, and now we're at a kind of a crossroads between an engine that is designed to maximize profit and build the most spectacular homes on the best pieces of land, is in direct conflict with the whole idea of affordable housing. And how do you bridge that? I mean, look at, it's kind of ironic that what's happening along the Columbia River is just a continuation, or not a continuation, probably continuation or parallel with what's happened along the coastline, which was also fishing villages prehistorically and historically that were pushed out when that business was longer profitable, and it was worth a lot more to build vacation homes there, forcing the local people out of what, ridiculously low paying jobs still remained. And so this has happened over and over up and down the coastline, well, virtually from Washington to California, and now it's happening here. It's the same phenomenon. And so how do we change that dynamic?
Thank you.
I'll jump in if that's okay. Okay. Well, to Kurt's point, you're totally right. So market forces alone have not and will not be providing affordable housing. And so that is where policymakers and hopefully partners and advocates and state, local, federal resources need to come in and kind of fill those gaps where it is not going to be profitable, especially for like 60% of area median income and below. That does need government subsidy or other incentives to make that something that a developer will build and maintain long-term and affordable pricing. But that is, there's a number of policies, big picture, that come into that. And so that is, straight up having a grant or some other funding brought in from outside, state, federal, local. That is also developer incentives of, you don't have to pay system development charges, you can pay them later. The Brand Road, where we will be donating the land, so you don't have to pay that land cost. That will make it a little bit more. I mean, again, we have a funding gap there, but makes it easier to build this affordable housing. But basically you have to tweak the market and change the scenario beyond just general market forces to make this work. And that is where we need all of you to really be supporting those efforts, supporting that allocation of resources, supporting that political time and energy to make that happen.
Yeah, I think to echo what Megan said, and she brought up a good point, and it's something we're looking at in White Salmon too, is obviously, we can't shift all of the dynamics, and land cost is certainly very prohibitive to these projects moving forward. And so how can entities such as the cities and counties engage on that front? And They're doing it in Hood River, and we're hoping to do it in White Salmon, but take that part of it out of the equation. If a city or county can invest in that land and then partner with a local housing authority or a nonprofit, a housing trust type of a group to actually create homes that become home ownership and protected housing in the long term, that helps to shift the course. But I would also say, and Kirk's correct, this is happening across all of these communities. And I think it's going to be even more so now after a year where everyone in many industries realize that working from home or virtual working might be sustainable in the long term. And so how do we get on offense and anticipate those changes? Because I think for a long time, our communities were caught by surprise as we were discovered or other interests came in. And so that is on the policy front at the local level, being more intentional and aggressive on the parts of your policy that are protecting and encouraging the type of development that you need to see. And that whole big dynamic to rely on a federal system where those subsidies are coming down, we need to also be encouraging at the local level true change on the regulation, because that is where you're going to start to shift the balance and you will not have to subsidize as much. And so the long-term progression on both of those tracks eventually should connect, but it takes continued focus and an informed discussion with the community, but also with those individuals tasked with making some of these hard decisions. And they are difficult and hard decisions when it comes to what a street, what a neighborhood might look like in the future.
Thank you so much. We are at time. So I do want to recognize that we have a ton of questions that have popped up in the chat. And I would encourage people, this is the first of many roundtables. This is going to be an ongoing discussion. And I'm so encouraged to see so many of you here today. I think this is a huge problem, but it's great to see how many people have shown up for this. And I would say, take those questions, save them for the next one, or email your officials, call your elected officials. I don't want to put anybody in the hot seat, but we do have several of them on the line today, not just our panelists. And, if this is something that you really care about and you want to see have change, then hold our elected officials to the hot seat and, ask these questions, show up at the meetings and, be loud. I do see before, Ubaldo, do you have your hand up?
Yes, and I just want to add something really quick, and I know there is elected officials here, and I want to just let our community know if we work together, we can make a change. And we have the experience last year with Mayor Marla, that we work together, we organize our community. She gave us the opportunity to participate. She opened the space for the Latino community to come and speak up at the city council meeting. And we make a difference. We were able to move the balance to create a better regulations in town. So to our local officials, if we work together as a community and give us the opportunity to participate, we will help to make these changes. And at Comunidades, we are working in to do that. So don't hesitate to reach out and invite us and ask us to participate wherever the need is. We are participating with our community, doing leadership trainings so we can educate or train our community to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ubaldo. And I just want to thank all of our panelists today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing information. Thank you for leaving your contact information in the chat. Tammy has dropped a link in the chat. If you want to click on that, we're asking if you can please submit your feedback. If you have any feedback from our meeting today or what you would like to see discussed in the future, we would love to have that feedback. And I also just wanted to acknowledge all of the hard work that Tammy has put into helping to organize this. She has herded the cats through the process. So thank you, Tammy, for holding us accountable and making sure that everything went as planned. And also thank you to Nate Stice, who also helped with planning, and of course to Kenny and Joel. So thank you, everyone. Want to be respectful of your time. So we're going to go ahead and end the meeting now, but I would just encourage you, stay on this topic, stay on this conversation, talk to all of your friends, talk to your elected officials. We can make a difference. So thank you for being here today.